not too much because there are specific ISOcat tutorials, especially for the Clarin NL calls. In the whole CMDI architecture, the whole picture that you see here, that have been shown already several times, we're now focusing on ISOcat. So it's the metadata modeler, again, who has to interact with the ISOcat to make the semantics explicit of the components. So ISOcat is a data category registry, or a concept registry. This specific instance is the data category registry for an ISO technical committee, and that's number 37, that works on the terminology and other language and content resources. So in the moment when we will see ISOcat, you will see that there are certain groups working there on standardization, and they do that in the context of this ISO technical committee. The Max Planck Institute, where you are now, is the registration authority for this data category registry and also for the standard that it's based upon. ISOcat provides everybody the means to find and select data categories. It can do that in the ISOcat user interface, but also there is an API that tools can use, and that's the one that the component registry uses to search and to find data categories. You can also create and share data categories in ISOcat. You cannot do that via a tool, then you always have to go to ISOcat itself. And you can submit data categories for some form of standardization. In our case, there are two important levels. There's some kind of de facto or recommended status that we get in Clarin NL by handing your data category over to Ineke, and then Ineke looks if it complies to all the rules and if it's nicely defined and complete, and then she can give it a Clarin NL recommended flag. And the other is the official ISO standardization, and for that there is a whole ISO procedure, but actually currently in ISOcat there are no data categories which have reached that level already. So they're all in the private area. So ISOcat and CMDI. There is the component registry editor, and in the component registry editor you have to make concept links to make your semantics explicit. The data categories that you can reach from the component registry have to meet certain demands, that you do not see all the data categories of ISOcat inside the component registry. They have to be made public. If you search in the interface, they have to come from the metadata profile, and they have to have a specific type based on where you are in the component registry editor. There are container data categories. These are associated with the components. There are complex data categories, which are data categories which can have a value domain of a specific type. These are associated to the elements in CMDI. And there are simple data categories in the component in the ISOcat, and these are with the values in a controlled vocabulary. So depending on which search button you push in the component registry editor, a specific filter for specific types is applied. So if you create a data category, you also have to be aware which one you should create for your data model. I'm going to switch now and show you how it works in the component editor. So I am logged in. Then I can go to my private workspace, and here there is a component I'm working on for an experiment. I'm first going to show something meshes. So I have to create some component for an experiment. The experiment has a title. Now this title is an element, so something that can have a value. If I search in ISOcat, I get to this dialog, I type in title, and I get a whole list of data categories from the metadata profile that are that have something to do with title, and I can inspect them. So if I hover over this row in the definition column, I can indeed see, well, this is the complete title of an experimental study. Maybe that matches what I want, and I select it, and the PID or the URL of the ISOcat data category gets into the concept link. This is what we want to do. Here's another, maybe there's a scenario that describes the setup of the experiment or whatever. I could go into ISOcat or into searching in ISOcat, and there are 0 results. There is nothing like that for describing a scenario. So I would have to go to ISOcat to create it. Return shortly. So when you need new data categories, you can create them in ISOcat. If you're from a ClarenNL Call3 project, you already will have your ISOcat tutorial. You can remember how to create new data categories. On ISOcat.org there's also a manual. There are these several screencasts that can help you to create data categories, and well, there will be other tutorials. What is important for things to appear in the component registry is that you assign them to the metadata profile. I'm going to show that in a moment. In beginning, you should keep it private. That means that you cannot search for it in the component registry, but you can just copy the PID to the concept link field in the component editor. Certainly within ClarenNL, you have to share them with the ClarenNL group, so Ineke can have a look at it. The other ClarenNL members can reuse it if they also think it's suitable data category. And officially at least, Ineke is the one that decides when it becomes public. In CMDI, sometimes you have to make your profile already public or your component. That means at the moment that sometimes these data categories have to be somewhat premature for this workflow, have to become public as well. So there's still a bit of a discrepancy there. So now I will show ISOcat. So I'm not going to show too much. I'm already logged in into ISOcat. Currently you have to create an ISOcat account. You will have to do so in the future as well, but it will be possible to log in via Shibboleth, so the same way as you do for the component editor. In the public part of the workspace, so here you see my workspace, it has 3 parts, private, shared and public. There are a whole series of thematic views, and one of these views is metadata. There's a description, and there are a whole list of people who overlook the standardization of metadata data categories. But we don't have to deal with that anymore. But what is important at the moment is that there is also a metadata profile that is managed by this metadata DDG, and that contains all kinds of data categories that people have said they are important for metadata. So these are the ones, the public ones, that you also see in the component registry editor. Well, if you select one of them, experimental design, you see here is the PID, the one that we should use to refer to it. And you can get all the information, including definition and so on from this project. If you have to create your own new data category, there's an editor for that. I'm not going to go into much detail, but we have the scenario. Here you would determine which type it has, container data categories, specific types of complex data categories, and a simple data category. If you hover here over this label type, you actually get information, and there are other places like in the help, which provide information what all the types mean. But what is mainly important is that in the profile, which is now set to private, you have to set it to metadata. To make it a metadata data.
There's a typo in the name.
Okay, no, I should not save it. So, Sinatrio, well, Sinatra.
We will throw it away.
Yeah. So I've shown all that. This was just a very short glimpse. If you have any questions, Clarion NL has an FAQ on ISOcat. If you have content-specific questions, so should I use this data category or whatever, you should contact Ineke. For more technical questions, there is ISOcat email address, and there is also a forum. There are some other cats under development, like this relation registry, RelCat, and also a schema registry, which is not so relevant for CMDI. And that, if you want some information about that or the status of it, you can just contact me. What I forgot to show in ISOcat. Is that there is also a Clarion NL VL group over here. And if you're working in a Clarion, Dutch Clarion project, you should become a member of this group, and Ineke can invite everybody to it. And this is the place where people can share data categories, and you can see there are a lot of selections, as they are called, so folders containing data categories for a lot of Dutch projects, and that's where they enter the whole procedure for getting a recommended status in Clarion. And it's also possible to actually load ISOcat with just this view, but well, we should make a link of that available on the Clarion NL website. But in that view, you will only see data categories that appear in this Clarion NL group. So if you would be in that, it is possible to find only data categories that have some kind of status in Clarion NL. Okay. That ends the talk.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Questions for Menzo? I should ask my traditional question. Okay, what's the minimum I have to fill in when I define a new data category? How much time will it cost me?
Not that much. You have to give it an identifier. Well, you can, if you can live with a lot of the defaults. Where that one is, Ineke is not happy with that one if you leave it like that. You should choose which type. But then you just need in the English language section, so there can be various language sections, you need to add a name and a definition. That's an identifier, a name, and a definition. But actually, if you just fill in the identifier, you're able to save. But okay, then you don't.
Then you get problems.
Then you get.
But you again. Okay.
And you only do that?
How many concepts are in there now for the metadata?
For metadata, there are 753.
Well,
but there are some people who created metadata categories that have not been assigned to the proper profile, so they don't show up.
Can you see that in the?
We cannot see that. Oh well, we could see maybe if we would go over all the profiles and check if all the data categories that are referred to. That's not a check we did until now. But people that were searching for relevant data categories sometimes found things, and then they said, hey, but we don't see it from the component registry, and then it's due to the fact that they are not assigned to.
It's the part, yeah.
Okay, clear.